Did you ever think that learning about regulation could be fun? Well, today just may be your day. Today's show is all about the PCI action plan as we roll out a brand new animation in our series, Fundamentals of PCI. Then it's learning from a failed PCI audit. Jimmy Ray's been through more than just one. Chat with an auditor gives us a view from the other side. And Christian Janoff is here to walk us through his well-thought-out, brand-new PCI design and implementation guide. That's the PCI Big Dig, a handy resource we're making available to everybody in our studio audience. And wrapping up the show today, Jimmy Ray is going mano-a-mano with a Cisco access point to show you exactly how to avoid having wireless bite your regulatory back end. Packed with PCI goodness, you're going to want to take notes on this one. It's TechWise TV, technology you can use from geeks you can trust. So PCI, this is certainly a special edition on TechWise,
right?
Because we're so much more focused than normal. We're still going to be very technical, I think. Maybe not as hands-on technical because to cover the breadth of what we want to cover today, I think is difficult.
Right.
But you have been through a lot of audits.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you about that, and that's part of the material for today is learning from that so that we don't, we can learn from past failures, so to speak, because I think some of those were failures.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But does this show only apply to someone who handles credit cards? Or do you think there's a broader appeal? If someone's still watching right now and they're like, you guys got another 45 minutes? I don't know if I should hang on.
You know, it's nice because they do have some really good best practices in there and some good guidelines just for anybody. So if you're really wanting, if you're kind of new to security or looking for a nice benchmark to set yourself up to, setting your network to the same benchmark that people who accept credit cards is a pretty darn good start. I mean, they have some really nice controls and some nice things to look out for and some nice ways to look for different variances in your network. So I definitely think it's definitely good.
Well, so as we were working on this and we're going through the updated DSS standard and I was reading through that, that is one thing that struck me, which is the notion that, wow, this stuff is, normally you don't see security recommendations actually positioned in such a clean way.
Yeah, that's specific.
Yeah, and it's, it's 12 areas.
Right.
And each one of those areas certainly has a lot of depth, but they really spelled out something specific, almost to the point where I feel like someone who doesn't handle credit cards would still gain value if they're looking for a bit of clarity or some education. It would not be a waste of their time to go through. And if it helps, man, just replace the word credit card with sensitive data.
Yeah.
Because it really is about treating, because the principles are not, to a security person, nothing in there that they're saying is crazy and surprising at all, right?
Not a surprise at all. Most security-minded folks are going to look at that and say, well, we already meet this. Now we go above it and exceed it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, but how do you report on it? How do you execute on it? How do you follow up on it? Which is brings me to kind of what we teased here at the beginning. You've been through some audits. You've held the hand of people that have gone through audits, both on a positive side and on a negative side.
Right.
Is that a badge of honor, failing an audit, or is that relatively common?
It's relatively common. I would actually even venture to say I don't have any statistical data on it, but I would say probably more people pass a CCIE lab exam on their first time than they pass an audit on their first time.
What's funny, you were telling me like 80% you thought failed their first audit. And when I ran that past Christian, our special guest for today's show, he sits on the board there.
Yeah.
And he said, oh no, I'd be surprised. Where's Jimmy Ray getting his data? And he wanted to challenge you on it. I go, no, I think he was just, making that up. He thought it was a lot higher. He goes, I'd say it's 95 plus.
Yeah, because an audit it's not like an exam. Like you have a gradient. An audit is very black and white. 100% equals pass, 99% equals fail. I mean, it's if you don't score 100% every area, you fail the audit. Yeah. I mean, that's how it is. And so the trick is how do you work with your auditor? How do you correct that? It's not designed to be a punitive type of thing. It's designed to set the benchmark and allow you to actually make controls and compensations for where you need to get yourself back in compliance. Because the thing about an audit is that when you're looking at it, and failing them sucks. I mean, we're all so conditioned because we're all in this, getting our certifications and keeping things up to date. And to have a failure on anything is just horrible, And with an audit, it still sucks to have a failure. But it's nice that we know what areas we need to focus on, right? I mean, it's just like...
it's a learning process itself, isn't it?
Most definitely.
It's not as if you didn't get to see how you were graded and where you failed and why, and actually you recommend a relationship with the auditor, yes?
Yeah, I think it's important to actually, when you have an auditor, to have to let them know, look, over the course of this year, we want you on retainer so that we run our quarterly scans. that we can run things past you. We buy new equipment. If there's new vulnerabilities, we want you to let us know of things that may be coming out. And a good QSA would be more than willing to do that. Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's a really big thing because it's a partnership, and they really do care. The good ones really do care about keeping you above that because you got to understand. Here's the thing: if your network gets compromised, it is incredibly expensive. You're on the hook. I mean, no matter if you take one credit card transaction a year or you take 10,000 a second, which is currently what they estimate, right? They say anywhere in the world, every second there's 10,000 swipes that are going on in the world. So there's a lot of stuff happening.
Likelihood,
yeah. So if you get compromised and the credit card industry comes after you, that merchant bank comes after you for that, then you're going to be responsible for any fines. Even if it's just the bare minimum of replacing cardholder credit cards, getting them new accounts, they charge you for that. That's like $100 a card. Which gets very expensive very, very fast. So if you just look at that piece, and it can go even more expensive like a forensic audit, which, man, when you start getting into forensics of any kind, it is incredibly costly. So a good QSA, a good audit is going to help you try and avoid all that stuff. And if you need a compliance and control, then they'll actually push that through and kind of get you a variance where you may need it and stuff. Because you got to understand, these PCI is not law.
Right.
It's a standard. It's a recommendation.
Yeah.
And so some things are set in stone, and some things allow you to kind of have a variance through them.
But all the relationships of the vendors that you have to work with to keep your business alive obviously depend on your success in working within that, right?
Absolutely, positively.
Yeah, so it's a forensic audit is kind of that really uncomfortable one.
That's the one you don't want, man.
Where you're on the wrong side of things now, and so everybody's just peering it all into your business.
Yeah, that's when you hear the rubber glove snap, man. Yeah. You're like, oh, man, here it comes.
Exactly. Well, hopefully people watching today's show are going to get a bunch of different ideas for how to avoid that, because that's exactly what today's show is all about PCI. We've got both the inside and the outside look, but first, we're going to take a look at our latest in the Fundamentals series. It's the Fundamentals of PCI. If you've been in networking longer than 10 minutes, you know the answer to many design questions, it depends, right? When it comes to credit cards with billions of dollars at risk, it depends. It's just not good enough for the big credit card companies. You see, it's not just hackers that are the problem here. It's the behavior at the store level that must be addressed first. We did a survey recently and found some interesting statistics. You see, each bit of data here gets exponentially more valuable when combined with the others. The more of these that are tied together, the more risky the situation. Now, this is a serious problem. Security pros call this an attack surface, and it's huge. It's not a new problem, but hey, it is security. It's always a moving target. Compliance in this area is not optional, but it's also not as daunting as one might expect. The credit card companies got together a while back and they formed the Payment Card Industry, PCI, Security Standards Council to help get rid of security vulnerabilities and protect cardholder data. 3 different ecosystems were formed to develop standards: credit card equipment, software development, and the biggie, our focus here, the PCI DSS, or Data Security Standard. PCI starts even before your credit card is swiped. Anybody interacting with credit card information must have a unique user ID, which is not the same as their actual name. This record now becomes the first bit of data attached to an audit trail so we can study every link of the security chain. In fact, you have to have a process for linking all access to system components, especially access done with administrative privileges, such as root, to each individual user. Okay, let's swipe that card and dive into the system components you need to be aware of. As your credit card info travels down the merchant's network, this brings us to the biggest PCI control: creation and maintenance of a secure network. Understand that cardholder data is treated as special throughout its entire life cycle, in motion, in rest, and in retirement. Note first the firewall here. This is so that as your network is zoned to separate trusted and non-trusted traffic, it can be regulated and filtered as needed. There should never be untrusted network on your trusted side. For example, internet access you have or that you offer can never be in contact with your trusted network side. Don't forget this includes any mobile devices and computers, no matter if they are company-owned or personally owned. If they can access your trusted zones, they must have personal firewalls. In fact, Requirement 6 specifies antivirus and patching updates on all systems as well. With that done, let's break out the calendar and drop in a reminder to recheck our device configurations. The requirement's every 6 months minimum. Sound fast? Well, in practice, I recommend at least once a quarter, but that's just me. Before we leave the local network here, it's worth mentioning default passwords. You have to change these before putting any gear on your network. For wireless, this also means community strings, encryption keys, and a few others. These defaults are well published and they're easily available, so don't let that one bite you. Now, while we're talking about passwords, get control of your users and the choices they can make. Believe it or not, this is an actual list of the most commonly used passwords found by auditors in the field. I mean, what is your password requirement? Do you know for sure it's even being followed? Users do not need access to everything. Sure, it's always been easier to have one shared password and trust everyone, but that's not going to fly now. The concept of limited scope must be applied here. Think discretionary access or need to know. One last thing, management statistics cannot be left out as their visibility and access require trusted side connectivity. This means encryption for all communication paths, because this is generally available in most systems, but not enabled by default. So check it before it gets checked for you. All right, let's get that data off the merchant network and onto the credit card issuer. As our data is now in motion, it's got to be encrypted. Any sniffing on these links should just produce gibberish. This is done with both crypto and security protocols like SSL, TLS, SSH, or IPsec, and it applies to all devices. Hey, we're all trying to get the best deal for our business, but don't fall for the old, you don't need all these features trick. Encryption standards are not created equal. Wireless, for example. Older technologies like WEP are strictly prohibited under requirement 4.1. All right, the transaction was approved. Some very valuable data has traveled from the merchant to the credit card issuer, but where does it go? It's got to be stored somewhere, right? Well, the easy answer is don't store it. That's not so easy to implement. You have to know where it is, for how long it's been there, and how you're going to get rid of it. This is all policy stuff. Now, some of you may even do batch processing and send end-of-day transaction data to headquarters. This can be done, but only under certain conditions, so make sure you know where it applies to you. Now, I'll tell you where to watch for some trouble here, your system logs. In fact, make sure you're not accidentally storing anything in any logs. This includes trace files, history files, database schemas. You get the point? Pay attention to what you are storing as well, because it's not everything. Sensitive authentication data like PIN numbers, full magstripe data, CV codes after authorization, these can never be stored even if encrypted. Now, a couple of final points. It's not all about technology. Good security often fails at the easier and easily forgotten physical layer. If I can just walk up and plug into your trusted side, I get access to a gold mine. It's a good place to bring the bodyguards back. Hey, where's the other guy? The final requirement here in the standard, 11 and 12, include some things that I would refer to as closing the loop. The network is dynamic. You must have a documented process for regular testing, vulnerability scans, penetration tests, rogue wireless identification, even file integrity monitoring. You must use PCI ASVs as approved scanning vendors for these once a quarter, and you got to maintain passing grades. Now, the center of this universe we've traveled through today, it's your policy. Requirement 12 is a proverbial hub for all these spokes. Everything we have talked about must be documented and shared. Think of this thing as a living operating manual, because it's going to be checked. That is a lot of controls. But considering that credit card crime is a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's not slowing down. If PCI DSS compliance seems like a bit of a mountain to climb, don't worry. As a member of the PCI Board of Advisors, PCI DSS special interest groups, and technical working groups, we go to a lot of meetings. We can provide a ton of best practice guidance to help you achieve all the benefits of PCI compliance. Thank you. So we tease this as the idea of learning from a failed audit.
Yeah.
And as you and I were talking beforehand, you actually started formulating what I thought made a really good list of things that you've learned from the audits that you've failed. And there's a great number of audits as you've held friends' hands, customers, and
that's
such
right.
like this, right? So
That's right.
I feel like you do have a base here from an engineering perspective to share some wisdom and perhaps give us another context that would be important for kind of what we're talking about on today's show. So I took the liberty of just kind of noting what you had gone through, and I just wondered if you could expand on a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, well, number one that we kind of talked about, and hopefully I got the list in the right order here, and this pertained to requirement 3 specifically around protect stored data, and really it was about being able to find the data, but you said 3.2 specifically, ooh boy.
Yeah,
that's number 1 on your list. They're saying that's one you really can't, it's not spirit of the law there. This is, not that it's a law, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
There's no messing around with 3.2. 3.2, because the PCI spells out specifically that you should not store data. Now, I've got a real strong affinity.
It's types of data though, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah.
specific elements.
Track 1, Track 2 data, PIN numbers, that type of stuff. And I've always had a real strong affinity for small business. I love small business. I like working with them, getting them up and going, and trying to help people understand that stuff. It's really one of my favorite segments to work in.
I don't blame you.
And the problem is that a lot of small businesses, they look at those customers and they're like, these are my customers, and I can store my customers' data if I want to, you know.
Oh.
And that is a very old school way
Yeah.
of kind of protecting customer base, right? And the problem is they're not your customers when they're using a merchant's issued bank card.
Right,
You know?
because it's not even their bank card to a certain extent. It's tied to their name.
Exactly
But we
right.
need to understand who really is carrying the weight of that liability. yeah?
Exactly, and so it's trying to get folks to understand that you can't store that. You cannot put that into a spreadsheet where a lot of this stuff is, and it's unencrypted, or stored in a flat file somewhere. That is a real big problem. You know, another issue I see with that is storing data is a lot of people will buy credit card processing machines, or they'll hire out a processor to do that stuff, and they'll take their machine and they'll just plug it directly into the internet because it's easier to connect back with their processor.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is when you scan that card and stuff, a lot of those machines
Unencrypted?
store that data unencrypted.
Oh,
and now
so not even just
people-
the transport. You're talking about on that machine itself.
Yeah, and
Well, then you
people-
just return it back to your product. Hey, we're done with our event.
Exactly.
Oh.
And then people are actually able to access that, spill out all the information, and there's a lot of holes there. 3.2 is the tightest requirement of all, but it's also the one that's broken the most, and it'll catch you and burn you
So
like
more than
crazy.
one you saw were getting tripped up.
Oh
on.
yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, anytime I look and see like credit card exposed, this latest one that Anonymous did for BART, BART actually got in, or Anonymous broke into BART, released I think like 10,000 user accounts and stuff. How they do it was SQL injection. They did that.
Old
They got
school.
in and
Yeah.
they released all their stuff. You know, it's like, come on, guys, really? But you know,
Could you have made
that's-
it any easier?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right,
simple
man.
things like that that'll get you.
Yeah.
All right, number 2 comes from requirement 11 on testing security systems and processes, specifically web apps.
Yeah, so that's always the really tight one is going back and verifying and making sure that you are in compliance with everything. You got to understand that PCI is designed as a benchmark. It's updated like every 2-3 years, right? So because of that, because they know how fast security moves. I mean, I just talked about the BART break-in. This show's going to be edited and moved down stuff.
It's an old break-in,
That's old
but-
news by the
yeah.
time people see this.
Yeah.
You know, so that by the time that PCI says check your stuff every quarter, you know, with some type of automated process or whatever, web apps included, everything that's on there, and a lot of people will actually work with some type of automated application to test this stuff out. And then they'll forget to check all their web apps, like their SQL-facing apps, and people can run a one-or-one and actually get to spit out all this data, and that's where a lot of people are getting really burnt on it. Man, I see that all the time, and it's a very easy one to actually miss, for sure.
Well, it's a superficial one that people who don't even know what they're doing, script kiddies are testing crud like that out all the time, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, so chances are your web apps may be getting tested, you don't even realize it.
Exactly right.
You'd also mentioned, by the way, that I had in our notes about documentation around proving that you've been testing this stuff as well. So if you're doing this, and I don't want to get ahead to another point, but documenting the processes that you're going through is always a good practice on this as well. So it's not just enough just to do it in terms of the internal stuff that you're doing, but also just make sure you got a trail.
Yeah, always have some type of audit trail, some type of logbook that shows date and time that you did a testing on there. Typically, on any time I keep any logs on anything myself, I set everything at what they call Zulu time, Greenwich Mean Time, because I always know that I don't have to worry about time shifts and that stuff. Everything from every store starts at GMT, period.
Boy, that's a fantastic tip, because when you're looking at log files, that's exactly what you need to see for your own personal forensics. You're going to save yourself a ton of time if you don't have to start worrying about whether or not you're matching up with time zone shifts or
Absolutely.
just clocks that are starting to creep a little bit, if you
Yeah,
will.
my -6 here, my +2 there, whatever. You know, set everything at GMT, document the date, the time, and who ran the test, what did you use to do it, and what was the version of the software that was actually used, and the time it
yeah.
started, the time it ended, a copy of the results, and then you're done. It's a really quick entry that you can do it. Typically, when I do those, we put them in what we call a smooth log. We write that stuff in there, staple the report, index it, and you're done. I mean, it's
Is
really
it fair to
just
say,
not much
when in
to
doubt,
this.
document? So if you're not sure, should I be documenting this?
Yeah.
You know what? If you're even asking the question, then just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Now, if no one actually ever looks at it, then fine.
Yeah,
You know, maybe find out.
because you're
what-
showing good intent. If
Yeah.
you have to get hit with a forensic audit, and your network is compromised for whatever reason, if you show good intent that you're doing this type of stuff, it's a lot easier for the auditors to find stuff like, oh, okay, now, all right, this is a little more advanced attack. I can see how you could forget that. All right, well,
You look like you're trying.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
That goes a long way, yeah.
exactly. Like, and instead, a lot of people, not a lot of people, but you'll see folks, they'll do the self-assessment questionnaire, the SAQ, and they'll be like, oh, okay, well, yes, we're compliant, yes, and then they'll answer all these things that they never really tested, and then they go back and get audited, and not a good thing.
Set yourself up for disaster.
Yeah.
All right, number 3, moving through these, probably pick a little speed here. Requirement 8, a unique user ID assigned to everybody, especially obviously admin privileges. It looked like from the notes on our conversation, just this notion of password issues. People, especially admin passwords,
Oh my goodness.
sharing passwords, things like this. Is that really still an issue?
Sadly, it is, especially when it comes to a lot of smaller merchants out there, is that they'll just accept the defaults and they'll plug it in, plug and play. Look, how much easier do we make it? Look at the packaging of some of our stuff that we release, right?
Yeah.
Pre-set up, plug and play, it automatically works.
Which you have to be from a vendor perspective.
You have to be, but the other side of that story is it's easy for everybody, and that's why I try and tell people, it's easy for you, it's even easier for a hacker out there, it makes it easier for all of us.
Yeah. So number 4, which is requirement 10, for those that are following along, track and monitor all access to network resources and cardholder data. Specifically, you had this point because it was around tracking wherever that data is going and having a record of that. But you'd also mentioned, which I think this was more interesting, correlation of IDS data. Right. Tell me about why that remains important there.
The big thing is understanding that my IDS and IPS is able to have, number one, a very low false positive rate, and that I'm using that as my central correlator for everything going in and out of the network, so that I have a nice automated machine process that is keeping these logs in a very digestible format. So if I do have to go through a forensic audit or something, I've got a way for people to grep and search those files a whole lot easier. And it makes, if you make an audit easier on the auditor, you're going to have a lot better chance of passing it.
And so that actually makes, that's where that, I was going to say, where does that make the difference in terms of passing and failing? Okay. And the 5th one on our top 5, requirement 1, install and maintain a firewall to protect data. How does that make it on a failure list? Because that seems like something someone would have done first, no?
Yeah, there's a lot of places that don't have a firewall actually installed. They just feel that it's either for a bigger company, or that they're not big enough to actually have one out there. Some people will set up things like IP chains, just more open source type stuff, and certainly you can do that as long as it meets firewall requirements. But there's a lot of customers out there that I see that just don't even have one. They're just like, nah, we don't need it.
So probably it seems like once you discover that, you pretty much know that you're probably going to discover a few other things as well.
Absolutely.
If you somehow found that wasn't necessary, we probably got a long day ahead of us.
A long, long day. Yeah. If you go in and find that that's your first stop, pack a lunch.
Right. We only got about a minute and a half left.
Okay.
So, but we also talked about a couple of bonus tips. Talked a little bit about this in the open in the beginning, but you had mentioned. And so we'll put this as number 6 as a bonus tip, but this notion of let's be mindful of the fact that the auditor works for you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And that's a big piece here, is that when you go out and you hire an auditor, it's important that you get one that actually specializes in PCI, not a reseller, a VAR out there that does everything in between. And, oh, you need a security audit? Yeah, we can do that. Oh, yeah. No, a security audit is not what you need. You need a PCI audit. And that PCI auditor works for you and understands about compensating controls and understands about, that building that long-term relationship, and that, how to work within the spirit and then within the law of PCI, if you will.
Now, see, I think that was key, because I like the notion of what you were saying there, which is forming a relationship with the auditor, which at first was counterintuitive to what I understood. So this was a good education for myself as we prepared for this. But it's a notion that because these auditors, it's not as if someone's descending down from the government, because this is not what it's about.
Right.
So having a relationship actually puts you that many steps, more steps forward, because you're saying, you know what, our network is dynamic, it's going to change.
Right.
Let's have someone that's an easy phone call, that it's rechecking something is not a big pain in the butt process that you have to kick off and find a PO for, because you've got a regular thing going on. This is part of your lives. You're saying, go ahead and make it part of your life.
Yeah, it's not like an IRS audit or something like that, right, where somebody's going to come in and be a wank to you. This guy really has a vested interest in seeing you pass this thing, and get it at 100% and see where you need to make adjustments and be successful. I'm going to pass this audit. These QSAs are really good guys. It's find that one that really clicks with you.
So you can do some pre-audit type stuff, obviously. In
Man,
that
I asked for the resumes. I found out who else have you audited. I'll look at the PCI website and look at what their scores are. All that good stuff. I mean, there's a really lot of nice controls that you have to find the right auditor built in for you.
Well, some good points. So form a relationship with that, have an auditor on retainer, some bonus points to our top 5 reasons to avoid failing an audit based on your experience. That's valuable. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Christian Janoff, besides having the coolest last name of anybody at Cisco here, you also worked on the new DIG, right? Now, not the big DIG, we're talking Boston. We're actually talking about the design guide for PCI, right?
That's correct, sir.
So what is the DIG?
The design guide is a validated approach towards compliance. So it's making all of Cisco's products palatable for our customers. We went through an auditing experience with Verizon Business to give it kind of more of a validated approach.
Okay, now, so let me ask you this then. So if I have another vendor out here we'll call brand X, and they're saying, well, I've got a PCI compliant device, it's PCI certified, or even such a thing?
No, there isn't. There's 3 parts to the standard. There's one on applications, and that has a certification process. There's ones where you take credit card devices like terminal swiping devices. Those have a certification process. But the data security standard, where all of Cisco's products and their technology partners reside, there is none. So we kind of developed our own through the looking at the standard itself and coming up with what is relevant to the standard. And by working with Verizon Business, we found capabilities that would help vendors make compliant devices, or not, that's a probably an improper way of saying it, capable of being in a compliant environment would be a better way of saying that, and for customers to purchase it as well.
Let's go down the weeds a little bit here.
Okay.
So when we're talking about making a product device compliant, so we're talking about what kind of feature set are we looking at to say this, not that, not this?
It's almost like capabilities would be a better word. And again, I want to reiterate, compliant is not, I mean, I use it in slang myself and it's a bad thing to do. It's capable of being in a compliant environment. So capabilities is the operative word. And let me give you some examples. Today, the standard is written for merchants. So how does a merchant become compliant? It's not written for how do vendors make compliant devices. It's not made for customers to buy compliant devices. It's not written from that perspective.
Right.
So what we did was we looked for the capabilities in the standard. For example, the ability to use network time protocol, NTP. There's in the standard it says you have to be capable of using NTP.
Right.
Well, then any device that made should be able to use NTP. So we kind of used that logic by extrapolating capabilities from the standard, applied that measure against our technology and our partners, and it can be used agnostically across any vendor to look for the capabilities that would support compliance. Does that make a little bit more sense?
That does make a little bit more sense. Now, when we're talking about the design guide here itself, the DIG, what is it that you cover in here? Now, I was looking at this online, and the artwork is pretty smoking. I mean, that is definitely cool stuff.
That's fun. We actually had some fun with it. We hired some artists that typically aren't, familiar with security and hacking. And we said, look, we just want you to have fun. Make some things what do you think of when you think of someone trying to steal your credit card? So throughout the design guide and on Cisco's website, you can see all this compliance type art. It's a lot of fun.
It's actually very beautiful.
Thank you.
Me and you and Rob just walked over to Building 17. If you're in the San Jose area and want to check it out, the artwork is actually quite impressive to look over there. So that would be a cool thing to look at. Now, I noticed that this is a CVD.
Yes, sir.
So as a CVD, there's usually some pretty good tip. I mean, this is a real honest to goodness, open up to page 20 and here's how you actually do this type of stuff.
Yes, sir. The design guide was written in a series of, at the beginning, it's just kind of like more of the abstract, very simpler stuff, and it goes into degrees of focus. So you'll start getting the examples, command line. Ultimately, at the very end, you'll get the full running configurations of every device. And what the CVD means is we actually did put this into a lab. We had all the devices working together, and we had a testing mechanism to make sure what our objectives were, in this case, to achieve a compliant environment. And we didn't just stop there. Normally, the validation process is a Cisco only. We kind of took it up a notch and said, what is an auditor, an actual qualified security assessor, what would be their assessment of this environment? And we were fortunate enough to work with Verizon Business and for them to also give us an assessment. And that's also available at the end of the guide.
Oh, so you had a QSA come in here and actually verify this.
So at the beginning, it can just be, here's our thoughts, here we think best practices are, but then it goes down into deeper levels of example configs and ultimately the full running configs and then that assessment of compliance.
Oh, that is very cool. And I also noticed here that there's only 2 people that wrote this book right there.
That's not true. No. Fortunately, Mark McLaughlin, who's my technical lead, myself, we were the primary authors, but there must have been, like 30 people within Cisco and outside of Cisco. High Trust, Verizon Business, VCE, and RSA were all part of this project. It was a large effort, and it was a lot of fun.
That's cool. Now, if I'm looking at digging into this now, the one thing about PCI that gets me, here's my a little concern about this being a CVD.
Okay.
Is that when I look at PCI takes a very systems approach.
Yep.
You know, when I look at that, how my standards are laid out, I'm actually able to see how all these parts are interrelating, how all my logs are being pulled off and read, you know, how my encryption, you know, how if I have to store data, how I'm doing that stuff.
That's right.
I'm a little concerned to look at this that I may say, here's how to configure my router A, and here's your config. And here's how to configure my firewall, and here's the config. Is that what you're doing in here?
No,
or?
it's not a cut and paste book. We're actually trying to show examples of if you have this type of untrusted network, for example, here would be the type of control you would put in. So it's more of like an if-then statements. What would be the concerns you would have at your branch or your store level? What would be the concerns you have at your data center? And then we give examples of what you would do to do that control. And even the configs at the back are not supposed to be a cut and paste experience. It's supposed to be by looking through them and being illustrative, by looking at them and saying, I can learn from, oh, this is how they did it because of this reason. It's not supposed to be, you know, just cut that in and paste it. We're trying to provide an example of why we did that. So it's much more of a learning thing than just a cut and paste book. Does that makes
Cool. So you guys took a systems level approach too at designing this, so it's not cookie cutter, if you will. I guess that's my concern.
Yeah, no,
on any type of that stuff.
That's right. We feel like we're in a unique position here because most of all of our competitors will come at you and say, look, this one product is capable of being in an environment. We actually look at it holistically, put all those devices together, took systems approaches by linking Active Directory and all the user accounts to all the systems and showing how you have one log place, one place for authentication, how they all work together and how they're configured to work together and the different cases. So we feel like we took an architectural approach. It's a unique approach in the industry, and I don't think anyone else can match what we did.
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely no doubt about it. So if I'm sitting down and I got my self-assessment form and I'm going through it and stuff, I can actually have my dig on one side and actually look, and it kind of could really help me set up this self-assessment form so I can really honestly answer it based upon my system that I'm trying to actually make PCI compliant.
Or if you're trying to expand your business, look for new business initiatives. What would be the things that you would be concerned about when you're introducing wireless, voice, taking credit cards,
nice.
Different things that would be transforming your customer experience? Is that giving you risks? So what are the new risks by introducing new technologies? We look at that from a systemic approach to the most advanced environments, and here would be the controls you need to be in place. So integrating voice, video data, all those things, not just only the point of sale. It's everything from an enterprise-wide approach.
Dadgum, that is very comprehensive, man.
We tried.
How long did it take you to write that thing? Or you guys, not just you.
All
you
of
guys,
us. This last iteration was about a year, and we've been doing this for about 5 years, though. So we've been committed to PCI for about the last 5 years and working with it. It was the retail customers that came to us and said, hey, you're Cisco. You have this security products. What would you do? How would you guys set up your systems to address compliance? That's why we started doing it. We've been doing it for 5 years. And subsequently, we joined the PCI Council and have been involved with the special interest groups and the board of advisors as well.
Oh, very cool. So you're actually getting this stuff straight from the council, who's actually pushing these requirements straight down. So it's coming straight from the source then.
And we're working with it to learn from the source and influence the source, because PCI really is a opted-in organization. It's a global security standard from everyone around the world coming together to deal with these bad guys that are trying to steal our credit cards. So there is no perfect science, as you know, in security. Right, so right. And there's differences regionally. So it's everyone coming together to try and form a standard that's the most secure. So it's in a maturation process, which is what a lot of people are criticizing PCI for, because it changes. But it's the best thing that we have today, and we're working to get better as a secure,
It has to change. I mean, when you're looking at the security landscape, I mean, by the time this show gets edited and aired, I mean, we said this earlier, that the stuff we're talking about is outdated. I mean,
Yep.
That's why I like in the PCI standard it requires, an update, checking everything every quarter, because it's at least like, look, these things get updated, a lot longer than what it takes for you to actually do the quarterly update and make sure everything's good, which I think is another important piece of having a good relationship with your own QSI too, right? I mean, so you guys can always partner up and keep yourself in compliance.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Well, Christian, so this guide is free.
It's free. Downloadable off
You can download it off the www.cisco.com/go/PCI. And it's right there. It's right in the very front of it.
That's right.
Well, man, I appreciate it. This is cool stuff, man, and it's really cool to have a nice reference to be able to set this up. And plus, being auditor verified, man, that's like icing on the cake, man.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Christian. Appreciate you, buddy.
Thank you very much.
Aaron, welcome so much, TechWise TV.
Appreciate it.
It's good to have you here. You came in from out of town. I appreciate you making the trip in. And really to give us a contrast, give us a different look from the outside. We're talking a lot today about Cisco resources around the PCI DSS and understanding how, what role devices need to play in a properly architected, configured environment. This is something you live every day. You are a QSA certified auditor working for Verizon Business Services as a, which obviously has the division for doing audits for PCI. So thank you for joining us, because I got a couple different things we want to talk about, but I'm curious, how does one become an auditor? How did your career path kind of end in that direction? You've been doing this for very long?
I have been involved with PCI since the inception of the program. So prior to the payment card industry being formed, did Visa CISP audits, some people call it KISP audits. The old
from the CISSP, is that the acronym you're referring to, or different? No, you're talking about the Q.
Different acronym. It's Visa's cardholder data security program that they had. All of the card brands have their own program, and they joined together and formed the PCI Council and the PCI standard.
So you've really seen things trend and merge and morph over time.
Come a long way.
Because we were remarking, as Jimmy Ray and I were talking earlier in the beginning of the show, at how clean, and I'm curious to get your impression. I feel like my background is not engineering level, but it's security as well with Cisco. PCI, as a security professional that would handle lots of different network security related things, PCI certainly becomes a critical part of that, but I always kind of had it off to here.
Sure.
But honestly, when I've been going back through the guides, and then as I read through the design and implementation guide that you guys have certified and worked with Cisco to produce, congratulations, because a very, very nice, well done document. What is your feel when I say, I think this applies to people who aren't necessarily concerned with credit cards? To me, it's a nice, cleanly written, well thought out guide to just sensitive data control.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a fantastic framework, probably the best with the most teeth in terms of being able to apply it to any data set, absolutely.
So wouldn't that be cool for a security person to actually get to use that information and not have to worry about you showing up?
Right.
And I say you show up, but I think another thing that's been discussed here today is, tell me about the relationship you have with your customers and or the relationship that you guys seek. What is the right way to look at an auditor? Because that's like a dentist. You know, some people I think don't always automatically construe what you do as being something that should be considered positive potentially, but I'm guessing you're going to argue that you're a nice guy, people should like you and invite you over more often.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
tell us about that.
We don't refer to ourselves as auditors, even though sometimes we're known as that in the industry. QSA is qualified security assessor, so we view ourselves as security assessors and really trusted advisors working with our organization, even in the capacity of a level 1 assessment. We like to be viewed as someone who is there with the customer side by side, rolling up our sleeves, trying to come up with creative solutions to address sometimes very complex compliance challenges.
Okay, very good. So you use the trusted advisor term, which I'd often thrown into one of the most abused terms in our industry.
Sure.
But I think you really mean it in the sense, and we've kind of talked about this before, is that a relationship can be formed because of the fact that customers are hiring an auditor to audit themselves, and it's actually in a kind of a community best interest for you guys to work together to stay at that level, because help me understand, the audit essentially becomes that formal moment in time, which a moment in time is something so fleeting when it comes to networks and it comes to a security posture. What kind of guidance do you give to that type of thing?
So I think this is the most commonly misunderstood, or where organizations often really have challenges in terms of their overall approach to PCI compliance. The level 1 assessment is the point-in-time validation of their compliant state, whereas PCI compliance, the act of being compliant, is an ongoing process year-round. And I think exactly to your point, the common shortfall that we see with organizations trying to not only achieve but maintain PCI compliance is that once they get away from that assessment, those periodic processes, the firewall rule set reviews, the quarterly vulnerability scanning, the patch management, daily log monitoring, those things sort of fall by the wayside sometimes. Other business drivers, operational efforts sort of take over, and they lose sight of that compliance effort.
Is there not a conflict of interest in the sense that let's say I'm a company, and TechWise TV has hired you to work with us over time to get us to a level of compliance. And then that review date's coming up that becomes the official documented control point, if you will, for lack of a better way for me to put it. And now you're going to be the one doing the audit as well. Well, you don't want to make yourself look bad, do you, in terms of failing an audit that you've helped me prepare for? How do you manage?
Sure.
Am I even getting that right?
Sure.
Is that indeed how it happens?
No, I think that's a fair question, one that we have posed to us on a regular basis in terms of that separation of duties. So even within our own PCI practice, if we were, for example, working with you to implement segmentation, something necessary to reduce PCI scope or contain your PCI scope environment, that level of remediation effort, guidance, consulting, trusted advisor type capacity would not conflict with an assessment. We wouldn't send the same QSA resources out to audit their own work.
So if you were physically doing that, or someone on your team, someone else is going to come behind you from another part of your organization, or probably same part of the organization per se. So you probably always have that thought of, okay, someone's going to recheck my work. So you've got that in your mind your entire time, right? Your documentation is going to be poured over.
Sure.
You know that someone's going to be asked a question, and they're going to go, Aaron never told me that.
Yeah.
You know, or he conveniently left that out. Yeah, Aaron doesn't like logs. You know, right? He hates parsing data.
That's right.
You know, whatever it may be. Okay, so that's interesting. So that's a normal thing that you deal with, obviously, and it's not a surprise question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've had this up behind us on the screen. This is actually not produced by your group, but produced by your company, this data breach investigation report, because I was trying to pull up. You told me that you guys were coming out with a new, this is a regular resource, this PCI compliance report that you guys come out with. How often do these reports come out?
Once a year.
Once a year.
Once a year.
And what is the data that's made up in this report? So someone in our audience would be interested in this for what reason? Is it just simply Verizon's opinion of the world? Probably not, I'm thinking, no?
Probably not. So really this is a culmination of effort within our own PCI practice, as well as overlays from our data breach investigative report, the other report that you just had up. We take a look at numerous PCI assessments. So last year it was approximately 200 PCI assessments across 2 years. We took 2 years of data. This year, since we're the next year's report, it's just a year's worth of data, about 100 PCI assessments. We look at really the results of those assessments. Where are organizations falling short? What are the most commonly missed areas? What are some of the shortfalls that hinder their achieving and maintaining PCI compliance? So as an example, last year's report, 22% of organizations were found compliant at the time they received their assessment report. This year it's actually a little bit less, 21%.
I was going to say only 22%, probably the right way to word that, right?
Only 22% of organizations are found to be compliant last year, and only 21% this year.
Okay. So what we're saying is, what is it, 78% are failing?
78% are failing at the time. They're not fully compliant at the time of their assessment.
But really what you're saying is that's not, and this isn't produced as in the notion that that's an indictment of people not giving a hoot. It's a fact of life, pointing back to your comment about having to measure a point in time for something that is never about a point in time, but it's about maintaining something that's inevitably going to be a flow, right?
And you're talking about hundreds of PCI controls and monitoring that, maintaining it. It's a challenging proposition.
Well, I know it also reminds me, I know a lot of guys in our audience, we have a significant crowd of people that watch this show that are working on their certifications for Cisco.
Sure.
And one of the common strategies within that environment, also especially around the CCIE, is to go out and, we saw this at Cisco Live, people were taking the free testing voucher that they would get for Cisco Live to just go take the test because they really didn't anticipate passing. They really weren't trying. Now granted, they may have been telling me that because they knew they were going to drink or something to that effect, but the idea was to learn what the test kind of look like, get their feet wet, because you guys, as a part of your practice, is when someone fails, actually even if they pass, they're going to get a remediation report, right? And this becomes actionable data that they can go back and continue to improve themselves, pointing into that process, correct?
Absolutely.
So you recommend this reading material next to, which do you think is better, Christian's Design and Implementation Guide? I'm just kidding. This seems complementary, though, because this points to trends.
It definitely trends. This can be easily digested by any executive in an organization to understand where common shortfalls might lie within their own organization in terms of really keeping PCI in the forefront year-round, turning it into a year-round ongoing compliance process.
Is there anything else you think that we've kind of left out that's kind of critical to share? Like something like, boy, I just wish people knew this.
You know,
before?
I think maybe to underscore really that stepping away from that point in time validation, you know, don't lean too heavily on your QSA that's coming out to do the assessment, which I think is typically the case, right? We see people that are really scrambling a month before the assessor's coming out to do the compliance. Look at a long-term partnership, you know, just like you and I had talked about before. You know, we're implementing a new wireless network. You know, how might that impact our compliance? You know, let's get a QSA in here, the expert. You know, make sure that we're doing this the right way. Get internal staff that are trained up on PCI. Don't let the QSA, you know, drive the assessment and drive all of the remediation areas. Understand the requirements, the intent of the requirements within your own organization so that you have the resources in-house to continue to drive compliance projects throughout the year.
So it would be fair to say, adopt an auditor. They're people too.
Absolutely.
I was just kidding. No, that's, you know, it's fun to have you here. Way back when our show was first getting started, I had the opportunity to fly out and in his office talk to Dr. Tippett, who is kind of the big brain behind CyberTrust, which has grown, which included you, because you were in the CyberTrust side. And actually what you're talking about there was kind of a paradigm shift, which I think is a Franklin background. You worked with Franklin Covey, I think, before that, too. I couldn't believe you missed in the terminology, man. Have you not been studying? No, you guys have continued to come a long way. Your depth and breadth and such in terms of the people that you are helping and the way in which you're driving the industry to make this stuff simple and applicable. And actually the steps that have been made for making security less scary, even for people who live in that environment, because security people, we tend to overcomplicate everything because I don't know if we do it on purpose, but it sure seems to justify our existence a lot. You know, and but I think simplification is actually that's exactly what security needs on a regular basis, and certainly for compliance. But Aaron, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Appreciate it, Rob.
Appreciate your perspectives.
Thanks.
You know, one of the most commonly used pieces of networking equipment in any merchant's environment today is a wireless access point. You know, and it makes sense, right? It allows us to bring our business closer to our customers, to actually design and be very flexible in how we have our business model. But the problem of it is that wireless uses this open airspace, right? It's equal access for everybody out there, merchants, hackers, everybody. Now, PCI knows this and knows that it's used, or wireless access points are used quite a bit, and they've got some requirements that specifically deal with designing your wireless network out. I think probably one of the more important ones is actually not using WEP. Right? I mean, most people know not to use that out there today, but in a lot of devices, it's still the default. And it's so trivial to hack now, it's not even a challenge. I mean, it's considered networking 101 to actually break that encryption. We show it as a way to show how to not design crypto packages, if you will. So they actually released a supplement that actually shows a couple things that are specific to designing out your wireless network. And a lot of this comes from, you know, like blocking your traffic on your credit card holder data side. You know, pretty common sense stuff. The PCI security requirements are really a nice benchmark to design a network out. But if I'm going to come on your network and I'm going to look at putting the engineering to it and find out what's going to be the best wireless solution for you and what's going to be the easiest to make you PCI compliant, my network's going to look a little bit like this. Let me go to a blank screen here. And typically, I'm going to look at some type of wireless system out there, like a WCS. I'm going to have a controller that's sitting in this environment. Now, I know a lot of you folks out there are thinking, look, man, you know, we're a pretty small shop. We only may have a few registers. Don't be surprised when your wireless network grows like your kids do. I mean, wireless, when you start using it, really proliferates to everything. And you'll have a lot less cable in your network than you will wireless. It'll grow and grow, and you'll use it a lot more. And the more devices I have, the more logging I'm going to have on my network. So the most important piece, in my opinion, for any type of audit out there or to be ready for security is make sure that I can have some type of off-site where I'm storing all my logs at. This will be my syslog server out here, and I can encrypt this data so that I can ensure that people can actually break in and read this stuff. Now, a wireless control system gives me the ability to have my access points to really be dumb APs. But these are not actually holding really a config at all. That config is coming from the central brain up here that's controlling these devices down here at the lower level. Now, if I'm setting this up, I'm typically going to dedicate a couple of these APs or all of them into what I call ELM mode, enhanced local mode. What ELM mode does is that it allows me to constantly scan for rogue access points out there, to look for any type of AP that should not belong on this network. That's also a PCI requirement as well, but it's one of those things that's a little more difficult to check for, because what you do when I've done security audits is that, you know, I'll take a little backpack and I'll pack that thing up, put a little small battery in here, like a laptop battery, and then I'll have a laptop that's going to have a small access point card in here that I've actually detected to scrape the SSID of these devices off and make it look like, let's say that this is Rob's store, and Rob is selling some pretty cool stuff, and his SSID is Rob's. I can scrape that SSID off, I can start broadcasting that up, and people are going to, that won't know, will try, or devices will try and connect up to this rogue AP and I'll try and glean or steal their credentials right off of here. In enhanced local mode, the WCS, being that all my configurations are coming from this one central brain up here, is monitoring, and when it detects a beacon from one of these rogue APs, it's going to shut it down. It's going to jam the circuit. It's going to do anything it can to try and protect your network, and that's pretty cool. It works really nice, and it's a great little feature that's built into the APs. Another two features that I like that I think are really critical are the adaptive wireless intrusion prevention system. This is a nice signature-based method that allows you to constantly monitor and check for different attacks that hackers could be seeing on this network. That could be some very common signatures. You know, wireless is a very complicated type of protocol, if you will. You know, understanding the fundamentals of it, the antenna aspects and ratios, writing a right protocol. We're still, the hackers out there, what we're seeing are using a lot of canned, a lot of scripted types of attacks. And so having a good device out there, you know, a wireless AP, if you will, or excuse me, not a wireless AP, that's certainly what you want, an adaptive wireless IPS, that's going to be a warehouse and store these signature is going to be really great for knocking out some of those hackers that are using more scripted attacks. And those are the ones that are just a real nuisance on your network. And finally, probably I'll actually start a clean slide for this one. One of my favorite products that we have, there's no way in this world I would ever put a wireless control system in a network without it having clean air on the network. Clean air is, in my opinion, is probably one of the most groundbreaking and most revolutionary technologies that we have for a wireless network today. It not only allows me to scan on frequency and off frequency, but it actually allows me to classify and detect what I'm seeing on that wireless spectrum. And I'm telling you what, that can be invaluable when it comes to looking at any type of forensic audit or any type of audit data, just general troubleshooting, right? If I have somebody out there, because we're using a lot of mixed vendor devices on a merchant network, and when I have some vendor equipment not playing with others, it really helps to have a clean air system that's able to say, well, look, I can detect this device, I can detect that, and it's really a solid solution. In my opinion, if you don't think that your business is really big enough for WCS, it is absolutely big enough for clean air. That is certainly one of the top technologies that we have at Cisco today, and I would say that in any type of wireless environment, don't leave home without it.
So Ray, as I understand it, you know, I think everybody's familiar with the fact that certifications require hands-on knowledge, but that also represents the number one impediment for many people getting started is, where do I get the equipment? Because we're talking about multiple pieces of gear that a lot of people don't have access to, but yet the training needs are quite large. You guys finally have an answer for this, it sounds like.
So what we have here is Cisco Learning Labs, and what we've taken is the iOS software and compiled it to run as a Unix process and made it available to learners over the web.
Awesome. So basically, this is the configuration that they get here to get started, and this is the initial layout that they would start with. Yes.
Yes. So we provide topologies and lab exercises for learners to go through, configure the routers, configure features, understand how they work, so they get that hands-on time with the consoles of the virtual routers and switches, and then they'll have that muscle memory to when they go in their jobs or when in certification exams.
And obviously they can access it from anywhere since it's something that but this is their own rack of equipment as well. So when they register, does this mean also they can save configurations and kind of pick up where they left off over time?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key part of this, is that these virtual devices are tied to the user. So if they configure something, save the config and exit, the next time they come in and start up the process again, it's at that same state. It's like having your own equipment.
So no one else is touching that if they want to zero it out and start over, or hone some skills and things like this.
That's true, yeah. So being that it is their own equipment, they can erase the configs and do whatever they want within that environment.
Now, to be fair, I understand the experience is slightly different because of the fact that it's virtualized and being accessed remotely. Let's be honest. And what are the because I think it's minor differences, right?
Right. So there are some hardware limitations to this because they aren't hardware devices. So things like VPN acceleration cards or voice cards that you put in a router, those don't exist in here.
What about Flash?
The Flash doesn't exist either. So those hardware type of interfaces don't exist. But we do provide Ethernet and serial interfaces, and within that you can configure all the routing protocols and core platform software features.
Man, that is awesome. Now, also to be fair, there is a small charge associated with this, but I think that is also reasonable. Can you walk us through what that is?
Yeah, at the associate level exams for like CCNA, we provide lab exercises, bundles of lab exercises. In this one, there's 12 exercises to do, and that's at $50 for a 90-day subscription window. And during that time, you have 25 hours of access time. And at the professional level, it's $75 for the same period in time.
That seems like
so
plenty.
$2, $3 an hour.
Okay, so definitely not an impediment, and certainly a lot cheaper than borrowing and begging for equipment.
Right.
And who knows what kind of state it is, and all the reloads and code updates you've got to do, because you guys keep the code at the levels that are appropriate based on what the BUs are bringing out as the core base code.
Right. Well, it's tied to the certification as well.
So
the certification
so it's already tied to that.
Yeah. And we hold the license, so there's no problem with that.
Oh, that's just beautiful. All right, and so final point, as I remember it too, the notion that this is a very similar look and feel to what someone would get when they actually go in to take the lab. They're at the height of their nervousness, and they're in there as well. It should be fundamentally pretty much the same type of look and feel, yes?
Right, we built this interface on the same interface that we use for the CCIE route switch lab exam.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Anything else we need to know about, Ray?
No.
This is I don't want to say overdue because I don't want to make it sound like we're missing something, but I know we've had this internally for a while, and from what I've seen from everybody here at the show, this is fantastic because this really does remove a major impediment and should help people get their certifications with more confidence even faster.
Exactly.
Awesome. Ray, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I appreciate it.
And they say that we would never do it. A PCI show. What's the right way to summarize this? I mean, is there one key point you think someone should take away from this?
I think that there's a couple, in my opinion. The first thing is that if you are taking any credit card transactions whatsoever, whether you're outsourcing those for processing, whether you're taking only one or you're taking 10,000 in a second, you are responsible for PCI. It's in the terms and conditions. When you sign up to take those, you're required to have a PCI compliant network.
There's not a PCI Lite?
No.
Not a little bit pregnant?
You got to do this. I mean, this is the real deal. And there's fines, there's penalties, there's some problems that can happen if you're not compliant. So it is something that if you're going to be a merchant, you must do this, period. Absolutely, positively. So the myth of I'm too small or I'll wait till my bank will contact me and stuff. No, there's no more grace period. Those are gone, they're expired. You absolutely, positively must be PCI compliant, period. And so that's step number one. Number two is that the industry is set up in such a way that you're really not alone. You're not having, nobody's really out to get you, like on an audit or anything.
This is a raise all ships kind of thing, isn't it? It's not like we're trying to catch you doing something wrong.
No, not at all.
Especially by virtue of the fact that you hire the auditor, right? This is all for all of us to do a better job of something that's fundamentally has been historically difficult, right?
Increasing our security. If you take 100% of the networking breaches out there today, and 92% of those breaches out there are caused by very novice script kiddie level type of hackers, if you will. And what we're trying to do is raise our security up, that we're raising the game up for really everybody. We're setting this nice benchmark that we would really want to meet anyway, to be quite honest with you. and building that out. And there's great guides that have nice best practices in there. There's people who really want to help you bring that up. So you're not alone, including like the big dig that Christian brought up. So good stuff.
Exactly. Very good.
You're not alone in the big world, Rob. Sorry.
I was trying to figure out where you were going to go with that because I don't think I know that one. I'm not sure if I just
made it up on the
fly. I think I should distance. I think it's the right way to do that.
That's PCI requirement 13. You kind of got to make up your own
there
song
you go.
at the end.
Always at level 13 stuff. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching the show. We certainly want to thank Verizon, our QSA auditor, Aaron, for coming by and hanging out with us and teaching us a little bit of things from the outside. Also, Christian, thank you so much for creating the PCI Dig. Encourage you guys to check that out. Go PCI will get you to a wealth of resources there on the Cisco.com website. We want you to keep in touch with us here at the show. As always, you can drop us an email. If you're old school like that, it's techwisetv@cisco.com. You can also go to our brand new YouTube site. We have joined the rest of the Borg. We have jumped onto the bandwagon with a big Cisco YouTube site, but you can go there as always at techwisetv.com. If you want to make sure you get alerted to all new episodes and all the other little stuff that we create, including the fundamentals that you saw on today's show. Big shout out to the team at Alchemy Creative and our friend Paul in London for the wonderful artwork on that. I hope you guys found that entertaining. Those guys help us create the fundamentals. You can get to all of that and be notified at subscribe.techwisetv.com. So a lot of easy stuff, easy ways to keep up, and good educational material that I hope you continue to enjoy. On behalf of the rest of the crew, my name is Rob. This has been Jimmy Ray. We thank you for watching.
TechWise 99 show club. Know what you're doing back there?
Oh, what the man.
It's way over there.
Oh, no, hey, man, each his own. That's respectful.
You can wear the helmet.